I'm Ava King, and I learned a long time ago that in my family, I wasn't a daughter or a niece. I was a burden they dressed up as a joke. The night it finally broke me, my uncle looked me dead in the eye, laughed at the idea that I mattered, and said I should be grateful he still let me show up. Everyone laughed with him. Everyone. And in that moment, standing there with their eyes on me, their smirks slicing straight through my chest, something inside me cracked so loud it felt like the room tilted. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just stood there, knowing one day they'd see exactly who they were mocking. They just didn't know the truth was already moving toward them, at the speed of a jet engine. Summerlin looked exactly the same as it always did when my family gathered there, bright, polished, and expensive enough to make anyone feel underdressed. I slipped through the back gate into my grandfather's yard, the kind of place that could pass for a resort if you didn't know the man who owned it. Soft jazz drifted over from the speakers near the pool, and clusters of relatives stood around in perfectly curated outfits, laughing at the right volume, holding their glasses at the right angle. I stayed at the edge of it all, near the salad table, where no one lingered for long. My hand wrapped around a glass of water while everyone else sipped imported wine. The air buzzed with conversations about stock options, new Teslas, and real estate in Lake Tahoe. Not a single person looked my way, unless it was to glance at my shoes before turning back to whisper something behind a manicured hand. My family didn't shove you out of the circle. They simply made sure you never forgot where the line was. And I'd grown used to standing on the outside of it. The energy shifted when Darian King walked in. He didn't arrive like he was joining a birthday celebration. He arrived like he was stepping onto a stage. Assistants trailed behind him, carrying tablets and garment bags, and people parted to make room, eager for his approval. He had that effect on them, a mix of fear, admiration, and the kind of respect money buys effortlessly. He spotted me almost immediately. His gaze swept over my bag, then my hair, then my clothes. Quick, efficient, judgment masked behind a polite curve of his mouth. It wasn't cruelty. It wasn't kindness. It was assessment, the way someone checks a label on a bottle before deciding whether to uncork it or put it back on the shelf. He stepped closer, that faint, familiar smile still in place, and instinctively, deep in my chest, something tightened, because I knew that look, and I knew the night had only just begun. The party was swelling into its loud, glittery peak when Darian lifted his glass and announced that the entire family would be flying to Colorado for my cousin's wedding on his private jet. A few people applauded like they'd just witnessed philanthropy at work, and others turned to take in the news as if he'd offered each of them a seat personally. He slipped an arm around my shoulders with a little too much pressure, angling me toward the crowd. His voice rose effortlessly above the music and chatter. Ava can ride with us. I wouldn't want her worrying about airline tickets. The laughter that followed wasn't cruel in tone, but cruel in implication, and it rolled across the yard like a warm breeze everyone else enjoyed, but hit cold against my skin. I held my smile in place, the socially acceptable kind, though something tightened low in my stomach. Darian leaned closer, lowering his voice just enough to make the next part sting more. Just don't bring that heavy work bag, and stay in the back. I'll have VIP guests up front. He said it as if he were arranging luggage, not speaking to a person. But across the patio, my grandfather caught my eye and gave me a small nod. A tired, hopeful gesture, asking for just one night of peace. So I nodded along with him, letting the moment pass even as it scraped something raw inside me. A vibration pressed against my palm. DHS reminder: log all travel accurately. One sentence, one rule, one protocol that had weight no one here understood. I swallowed hard. If I refused the jet, I'd look dramatic. If I accepted without logging my movement, I'd violate federal policy. So I did what kept the night intact. I chose not to make a scene. I chose what looked simplest, even though it wasn't simple at all. I didn't know that choice was the first step toward everything spiraling out of control. Later that evening, I slipped inside to escape the noise and found a quiet spot on the far end of the living room sofa. the party sounds blurred into a distant hum. Laughter, clinking glasses, music floating in from outside. All of it felt disconnected, like I was watching the night unfold from behind glass. I unlocked the secure DHS app and worked through the layers of authentication before entering the details for the upcoming flight. Aircraft type, departure time, pilot name, intended path. Every field mattered. Every entry had to align with FAA data, or the system would flag my movement as irregular, a status that wasn't just inconvenient, but alarming. No one in my family knew any of this. They never asked. They never cared. The less they understood, the easier it was for them to assume my work was something small, something forgettable. But being a custodian in cyber infrastructure protection meant holding access to specific SCADA entry points. It meant that if my location suddenly shifted without proper verification, DHS wouldn't assume a mistake. They'd assume a threat. I finished logging the flight and exhaled, ready to rejoin the noise outside, when a voice floated down the hall. "Should I file the manifest with FAA, sir?" Darian's assistant, and Darian's answer hit like a blow. "No. Ghost flight. I'm not dealing with tax checks this week." My head snapped up. A sharp head, cold jolt ran through me. A ghost flight meant no FAA trail, no transponder, no data to match what I'd just submitted. DHS would see that mismatch as unauthorized movement, a potential abduction of federal personnel. I stood halfway up from the sofa, heart pounding. I knew I should confront Darian, but I also knew exactly how he'd respond. Dismissive, amused, irritated that I dared question him. And in that moment, I understood something with brutal clarity. He wasn't just careless. He was about to drag me into danger I couldn't talk my way out of. The next morning, we gathered at Henderson Executive Airport, a place where the wealthy treated the runway like a private driveway. The heat came off the tarmac in shimmering waves, mixing with the acrid scent of jet fuel. I stayed a few steps behind everyone else, keeping to the background the same way I always had. When a hushed exchange near the cockpit sliced through the morning, the pilot spoke with a tremor he tried to hide. "Sir, completely off grid?" Darian's response was calm, almost bored. "Ghost flight. No manifest. No transponder. Do it my way." My pulse stuttered. A ghost flight meant no FAA trail, no matching data. And because I had already logged the trip with DHS, the system would read the discrepancy as forced movement. That meant an automatic escalation. That meant an intercept. And from Nellis AFB, intercepts didn't arrive gently. They arrived in the form of an F-22. I moved toward Darian, choosing each word carefully. "You need to file the manifest. This isn't optional." He laughed with the confidence of a man who believed the world bent to him. "Ava, people like us don't get tied up in government red tape. It'll be fine." He gave my shoulder a patronizing pat before returning to his entourage, leaving me standing there with the knowledge he'd just lit the fuse on something he didn't understand. The cabin door shut behind me, and my phone buzzed with a secured tone. "Ava, your signal is moving, but there's no FAA flight. What's happening?" My supervisor's voice thickened with alarm. "If you take off misaligned, NORAD could classify you as unauthorized. We might not intercept in time." I looked over at Darian, already swirling champagne, holding court inside the cabin as if federal classification systems didn't exist. He was inches away from turning my travel into a national threat response. The pilot engaged the cabin lock, an unmistakable metallic click behind me. I tried the handle. Nothing. The jet lurched forward, wheels rolling. The ground slipped past beneath us. I was trapped inside an aircraft that could be mistaken for a kidnapping in progress. There was no way to explain protocol in seconds. No way to make Darian grasp consequences he didn't respect. Then, as if to seal his own fate, he raised his glass toward the front. "Don't worry about FAA. This jet won't be bothered." His guests laughed. My supervisor braced, and I felt time tightening around us. The engines roared, vibrating through the cabin, and the jet accelerated hard. Outside, the runway blurred. Inside, My heartbeat thudded against my ribs. NORAD would already be watching. DHS would already see the mismatch. I reached into my jacket and felt the smooth, cold edge of the emergency cyber custodian beacon. My last line of defense. If I didn't trigger it, the system might choose the most drastic response. I inhaled once, pressed the switch, and heard a tiny click that sent a cascade of alerts across federal networks. Then, I opened the encrypted app and typed the message that could save everyone on board. Not a kidnapping. Do not engage. Intercept only. I turned my face toward the window, so no one saw my shaking hand. Darian laughed with his guests, oblivious to the crisis he'd created. As I scanned the cabin, my cousin posing for selfies, my aunt flaunting jewelry, Darian boasting about some new deal, I realized none of them had any idea that their safety depended entirely on the person they dismissed most. And that realization settled into me with startling clarity. Sometimes, a family isn't a family. Sometimes, it's just the people who never learn to see you. The jet shot forward with a force that pressed us into our seats, the engines screaming as the runway lights streaked past like white-hot sparks. Every vibration felt sharper, heavier, as if the aircraft itself sensed the chaos unfolding around it. I had triggered the beacon. I had sent the intercept code, but federal protocols didn't answer to panic. They answered to rules. Then it came, the roar. A violent, metallic bellow split the sky open. The cabin shuddered, glasses rattling, nerves snapping. I turned toward the window just in time to see an F-22 Raptor tear past at a parallel altitude, close enough that sunlight flared off its silver body like a blade sweeping across our fuselage. My cousin's scream hit the ceiling. Her champagne glass slipped from her hand and shattered across the aisle, pieces scattering like ice. Shock rippled down the rows of passengers. The intercom crackled, the pilot's voice nearly breaking. "Mr. King, we're target locked. I don't know how." Darian lurched upright, fury rising to cover the fear in his eyes. Locked? By who? Who thinks they can threaten my aircraft? I met his stare, keeping my voice cold. You challenged a national defense protocol? Did you really think no one was watching? He swallowed hard, anger collapsing into the first flicker of dread. The jet jerked violently as the pilot obeyed ground command and forced a sudden deceleration. In the distance, a line of tan Humvees barreled toward us, fanning into a tactical V-shape. Passengers leaned into the windows, stunned, whispering prayers they hadn't said in years. Darian's rage reached a boiling point. "This is outrageous. I'll sue the entire base." But the words dissolved into silence as a second F-22 swept inches above the cockpit, forcing the pilot to freeze the jet exactly where it sat. The cockpit door burst open. The pilot stumbled into the cabin, white as chalk. "Mr. King, this isn't FAA. This is Federal Command. DHS and NORAD have ordered a halt. There's a federal cyber custodian being moved illegally on this aircraft." Every head turned toward me at once, wide eyes, trembling hands, dawning panic. Hours earlier, these same people barely spared me acknowledgement. Now they saw me as the reason armed forces surrounded them. Darian glared at me as if betrayal lived in my bones. But he had violated the law long before he realized who he had dragged into it. He grabbed his phone, shouting into the void, "I'll get the Secretary of Energy on the line. Someone will fix this." But no one was waiting for his call, not with two Raptors circling above us like steel predators reminding him that money couldn't buy jurisdiction over national defense. His power, constructed, rehearsed, and flaunted, began to crumble piece by arrogant piece. The metal stairway slammed against the fuselage. Heavy boots thundered up the steps, followed by the mechanical clatter of tactical weapons and gear. A sharp, decisive strike echoed. The cabin door blew open. Black-armored RSRT officers flooded into the jet, their presence immediate and overwhelming. They didn't look at Darian. They didn't acknowledge the VIPs. Their eyes locked on me with absolute purpose. Commander Sloan stepped forward, the weight of federal authority radiating off him. He saluted, precise, formal. "Custodian King, you're now under RSRT protection." Your movement falls under our command. The cabin froze. Even the hum of the engines seemed to die. Darian erupted. Custodian? Her? She's just... Sloane cut him off without raising his voice. Sit down, Mr. King. You're obstructing a federal response. Two officers guided him firmly back into his seat. Passengers trembled, some crying into their hands. Sloane held up a tablet displaying my clearance. The pilot nearly buckled. She outranks everyone on this aircraft. Darian stared at me as if seeing a stranger. I stood when Sloane motioned. I passed Darian without a glance, without a word. Silence was the boundary he could no longer cross. Outside, a DHS C-20C waited beneath the circling Raptors. I stepped into the desert wind and didn't look back. The desert wind struck my face the second the cabin door opened, sharp enough to snap me fully into the moment. RSRT boots clanged down the metal steps like a war drum, and Sloane motioned for me to stand. As I rose, the cabin went silent. No more smug glances, no more dismissive smirks, only fear. Wide-eyed and trembling, Darian thrashed against the officers restraining him. Ava! What are you doing? Tell them to stop! I'm your family! I looked straight at him, steady and hollow in a way I hadn't expected. I'm not doing anything. Uncle Darian, you did this to yourself. His face drained, as if he finally saw the line he'd crossed, above us. An F-22 carved a perfect arc across the sky, a blade of steel drawing the boundary between his imagined power and the real thing. At the bottom of the stairs, a gray C-20C waited, quiet and purposeful. Sloane called up to me. Custodian King, your aircraft is ready. I descended without looking back, even when Darian shouted again, voice cracking. Ava, don't let them take me. Family doesn't gamble with federal law to save money, I said, and kept walking. The door closed behind me, sealing out the noise. For the first time, silence felt like freedom. 3 weeks after the runway incident, a DHS internal brief appeared in my inbox. Stamped urgent, but written with the detached precision only federal language can manage. Darian King was now officially under investigation for interference with custodian transportation, a charge severe enough to threaten criminal penalties, freeze federal contracts, and dismantle the reputation he had polished for decades, and the fallout came fast. The Office of Inspector General launched inquiries. DHS OIG opened a parallel review. FAA Security Division sent auditors. Cyber Command analysts combed through the digital traces of the flight. They searched his hangar, removed entire panels from his jet, cataloged every piece of avionics hardware, and tore apart the seat bases to inspect hidden circuitry. His prized aircraft, once a symbol of wealth and status, was reduced to evidence under bright federal lights. The press didn't have details yet, but speculation exploded across national outlets. Articles hinted at a Nevada energy magnate entangled in unauthorized federal transport, and reporters circled his company headquarters like vultures waiting for confirmation. Then the twist arrived, late one afternoon. As the office quieted and I prepared to leave, a staff assistant handed me a thick envelope. King & Myers Law Group, attorneys for Darian. Inside was a letter asking me to save him. He wanted a formal statement claiming he had no malicious intent, that he hadn't understood the implications of a ghost flight, that he had acted with concern for my safety. With my signature, he might protect his federal clearance and salvage the contracts propping up his billion-dollar empire. He had spent years belittling my work, dismissing my warnings, and assuming his influence eclipsed mine. Now he was asking me to rescue him from consequences he created. I felt no anger, no satisfaction, only clarity. I walked to the federal shredder, fed the letter into the slot, and listened as the blades chewed through every carefully crafted plea. The sound was final, a boundary set, family or not. No one crosses that line, not anymore, late at night. The DHS building settled into a kind of stillness that felt almost sacred. The servers hummed softly behind reinforced walls, steady and rhythmic, like the quiet heartbeat of something vast and alive. I walked through the long corridor toward the balcony, passing colleagues who nodded as I went. Their nods were small, simple gestures, but nothing about them felt performative. They weren't pretending for show, or adjusting their posture the way my relatives always did around donors or cameras. These nods carried weight, respect, trust, and the acknowledgement of someone who had earned her place. Outside, the balcony opened over the Las Vegas Valley, the city glowing like a scattered constellation against the desert darkness. The wind lifted gently around me, warm with the remnants of daytime heat, but softened by the night. I looked down at the world that had hosted the rise and fall of a man convinced he was untouchable. I thought of Darian, of that jet barreling down the runway, of the F-22 slicing above us, of the faces that turned toward me in sudden fear. Not because of who I was, but because of who they finally realized I had always been. There was no resentment left in me, no desire to rewind or rewrite anything. What remained was clarity. Family isn't defined by shared blood, but by whether your presence is valued, your voice heard, your worth recognized. I rested my hands on the cool railing and let the night settle around me. For the first time, the feeling wasn't survival. It was freedom. I wasn't standing on the outskirts anymore. I wasn't earning a place. I wasn't proving one. I belonged here, in a world built on responsibility, honor, and purpose, not wealth or lineage. A quiet smile formed as I breathed in the desert air. This wasn't a story of revenge. It was the moment I finally understood exactly where I deserved to stand, and that I never needed anyone's permission to stand there again, 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 to stand